So I'm very honored to be speaking with Mark Isham, whose amazing career has garnered him Grammy, Golden Globe, and Oscar nominations. His versatility can be heard through his scores like Point Break, Of Mice and Men, A River Runs Through It, The Hitcher, Blade, Crash, The Mist, 42, and so many more. He scores the extremely popular series Once Upon a Time and Once Upon a Time in Wonderland on ABC, and now he's reteaming with director Frank Darabont for the highly anticipated Mob City, which premieres on TNT. Mark, thank you so much for speaking today.
It's my great pleasure.
So I know you have an amazing background in music as a trumpeter, and so how did you fall into that musical path, and what kind of pushed you towards composing? What led you to film and television?
Well, I've always been interested in orchestral music. I grew up studying classical trumpet and played in symphony orchestras throughout my youth and into my actually all throughout my 20s. I played in the San Francisco Symphony and the Oakland Symphonies. But I got bit by the jazz bug in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Started listening to Miles, and of course that was about the time that Miles was plugging in, and Weather Report was starting to come about, and Chick Corea and Return to Forever, and Mahavishnu Orchestra, and all these great fusion bands, and that's what sort of took over my life. And I managed to do those two careers for a number of years, but eventually the classical music fell away. And I had a fairly decent jazz trumpet career for a number of years. And then but I was always interested in writing, and I wrote for myself as a band leader. And then I was offered a chance to score a film, and I really enjoyed it. And I turned out to be actually kind of good at it, even though I'd never studied it. It took me a long time, obviously, that first film, having no background or technical training in it. But I had a knack for it, and so I just pursued it. And then, so the next sort of decade of my life was as a recording artist and a film composer. And then I have a family, and the rigors of the jazz life and the touring life sort of started to take its toll.
Right.
And I put more and more energy into my film composing career. And a number of years later, I find myself mostly doing that. And the trumpet has, I must admit, fallen to the wayside. Of course, till Frank Darabont calls.
Right. So looking at music and film music kind of as a whole, what does film scoring mean to you personally as a composer, as a person? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think after doing it now for quite a long time, 20 years now, I guess, I've come to the realization that really film composers are a large percentage of the composers of our culture. In other words, we're the guys that are getting the court commissions, the larger court commissions. So when Disney or a large film company gives you, six-figure budgets, this is an opportunity to really explore modern classical music, and as long as you do a good job for the film and for the director and for the storytelling and for the studio, and you have a tremendous opportunity here to use large orchestras and large electronic palettes and all sorts of exotic instruments, and it couldn't be more fun and challenging and creative world to live in.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree completely. So now for Mob City, you're working with Frank Darabont again. You worked on The Mist with him before, and so what were your first conversations with Frank about? How did he pitch the story to you, and what kind of musical chats did you have with him as a director?
Well, he basically just said, "Look, this is based on the book. I don't know if you've read the book, but it's based on the true accounting of the history of Los Angeles from the late 40s into the 50s. And this first 6 episodes takes a period of, I haven't actually added up, but it probably could be as little as 5 or 6 days um, in that history, and he's so skillfully written this that the historical truths are all there in place, but he's written the story of the people just below that, the guys whose names weren't in the papers, but whose lives are much more interesting, and lives who we get a chance to take a look at and be a part of. And it's really masterfully written, and it's an homage to film noir.
Right.
From the cars to the to the dresses to the language to the music, and he basically said, let's get some great music, let's license some great songs, let's put some great bands together, come up with a great scoring vocabulary, and just let's have a feast here.
and you say it's an homage to film noir, and so when you do say terms like mob, mafia, gangster, noir, these genre names bring up a lot of classic movies from the past to kind of the forefront of people's memory and their scores as well. Even there's a recent movie, Gangster Squad, which kind of revolved around Mickey Cohen and that. So how did you try to find your own unique voice for this story while still kind of playing with certain, I guess, genre expectations and archetypes? Like, did you really try to make it a part of this world, or try to make it its own kind of unique piece?
Well, I think hopefully I've done a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that I've come up with a pretty unique scoring vocabulary, but that pays homage to at least to some of the things and tastes and ideas that came out of film noir.
Right.
I sort of bent the rules. I think that a lot of the musical influences aren't purely from the late 40s. I tended to grab some things from the 50s as well. Our bands are, we could say, are a little ahead of their time. They have a definite influence of the cool jazz movement. Having said that, though, that there was a very strong cool jazz movement just beginning to flower in Los Angeles down on Central Avenue. And but we also, of course, pay tribute to the great swing bands of that period. A great rendition of the Dizzy Gillespie song "Night in Tunisia," and there's a lot of fascinating influences. In the score itself, I decided to write for string quartet and sort of jazz rhythm section, but not playing jazz. In other words, a drummer playing cymbals with mallets, the bass player sort of just hitting single notes and hitting the bass. A little bit of that sort of musique concrète idea slipping into the whole thing, which of course blossomed in the 50s, but I took the intellectual conceit that it was being thought about in the 40s. Paired pianos, things like this, things that Bernstein would have loved, and compositionally, probably he was the greatest influence, because I feel he is the father of modern American music in that sense.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds fascinating. Wow, I can't wait to, because I haven't heard any of it, so I can't wait to tune in tomorrow night and check it out. And so now the format of Mob City is it's quite unique too. It's 3 2-hour episodes. So did you approach this as you would as 3 kind of 2-hour episodes or 3 2-hour movies, or did you kind of look at it as one big 6-hour story arc?
Well, I tried to look at it as much as possible in the one 6-hour story arc, although it's certainly structured like 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Each episode has an ending, and I think it was a decision later on, once we were already into the 6-episode structure, to do 2 back to back.
Okay.
So I think there's been some reshuffling. But it can be broadcast anyway. It can be broadcast as 6 individuals. It can be broadcast as 3 2-hours. And but it's for TNT, so there are commercial breaks, and there have to be those moments where we come to a screeching halt and leave you on the edge of your seat.
So when you deal with that, when you're dealing with kind of acts in and acts out, did you treat it as any other series that was structured that way, or was it structured, like, how do you spot when you go through, do you pick this during the spotting sessions? Is that when you kind of decide this is where the act out's going to be and this is where commercial break's going to be?
Well, those decisions were made by the picture editor and Frank, and quite frankly, they were written in the story. I mean, I don't think you can write for television and not plan that sort of thing out way in advance, or else you're going to be in trouble. So we knew the blueprint from the script as to what these dramatic pauses were going to be. I think the choice was always, do you take the tried and true, big crescendo to the big bash at the end, or do you come up with other things to do? And we did both. There are occasions when it was really the best thing to do was just to take the ever ever effective, crescendo to the bang at the end. Sort of what the hell? What could possibly happen next? But then, as Frank pointed out, he said, "Look, we can't just do this every time. We need, let's try. Can we go out with a grin here? I mean, he would describe them in different ways. Can we wink here at the end, or can we just sort of slip out without even noticing?" And so there'll be times when we do approach it differently.
So in the production timeline of this whole series, when did you come in and start writing music? Were all 3 episodes finished? I mean, the whole 6 episode series, was it finished, or did you come on as they were filming? Like, when did you start kind of writing music for this?
I started quite early, and I think this is one of the really brilliant things that Frank had designed, and even had written into the script. The music will start in a scene, and you will think that it is score. It'll be playing, it'll play that scene, it'll even play the next scene, and then you'll cut to a club, and you'll realize what you've been listening to for the last 2.5 minutes is actually a live performance in that club.
Oh, wow.
So we did a lot of pre-recorded music, and then shot them live on in the club. But Frank always realizing, all right, so we want to be able to start this music earlier, so let's make sure that we shoot the scene so that this part of the song is playing there. And quite frankly, for me, who's not an experienced picture cutter, I was a nervous wreck as to how this was all going to be put together. I'd really just put my trust in him and just made the music as best I could, and recorded it with as much separation and flexibility as we could for him. But he worked it out. He and his picture editor, and then our music editor just did a fantastic job. And I think there's probably 5 or 6 times over the 6 episodes where he does this technique, and it's really a stunning effect.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's funny because that technique is usually used, I would say, in comedies a lot, that when they play with non-diegetic and diegetic music, where someone is giving a monologue and there's this very tense violin playing, and it pans and there's an actual violin player in the room. But I'm excited to see it in a very dramatic fashion like that. That's going to be exciting.
It's very exciting, and it really just makes the music such a major player of the storytelling, which without being intrusive, just being there and really making a large contribution.
Absolutely. So now you're also scoring another very successful series, well, 2 actually, with Once Upon a Time in Wonderland. So how do you handle 2 broadcast shows because they're airing at the same time? Are you actually scoring both these series at the same time, or is your schedule kind of worked out where you're not working on them simultaneously?
Yeah, it's a leapfrog. I mean, the good news is on those shows is that it's the same producers.
Mm-hmm.
And several of the writers and several of the like post-production, the head of departments are the same for both shows.
Right.
So that they are aware that for them to keep their jobs for both shows, that there has to be a certain leapfrog in the schedule. And so the scheduling guru at the beginning of the season came up with a schedule that works, and we all signed off on it. And it's not without its challenges, but it has worked out.
I can imagine. Just when I talk to composers on a regular broadcast series, it's just like, oh, scheduling is crazy, but you're on 2.
Yeah.
But since these shows kind of deal with magic and curses and fantasy elements, yet all these characters kind of existing in the real world as well, was it a challenge to nail down the sound for Once Upon a Time and its characters?
Well, looking back, I mean, we started 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. it didn't feel like that much of a challenge, actually. For some reason, it was one of those things that felt really natural to me. I mean, I've always had a a fascination with these stories, and I think it was just the sort of thing that I was ready for doing. And I think I've been, when you do a pilot of these things, you never know if it's going to go or not. And yet, in that pilot, the first pilot, once upon a time, we were introduced to like the 5 major characters, and so I wrote themes for all 5 of them for the pilot, and I feel very fortunate that those 5 themes have really stood the test of time. And we're still 3 years later, we're still using those themes, and they still work, and people still love them and respond to them, and they still tell the story.
Yeah, it's a lot of characters to juggle as well. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
So
That's something I don't normally do. I don't normally write themes for characters. I generally write themes for concepts. Like in a love story, I won't write the girl's theme and the boy's theme. I'll write the theme of their unrequited love, and then the theme of their betrayal, and then the theme of trust, things like that, which I find serves storytelling much better for a composer. But for these shows, it's very much sort of much more on your sleeve storytelling, and the themes for characters and specific relationships just seem to really help us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too. The way, and I noticed that through your music, different themes for different kind of, they're more overarching and kind of grander ideas.
Yeah.
But so now you're working on these 2 series, so both Mob City and Once Upon a Time, they have incredible production design and costumes and cinematography. And so does the look of a project, does that have any influence on your music, or do you mainly focus on story and characters and setting, or as the basis of your creative inspiration, or do you try to take in all aspects of the filmmaking process?
I love all aspects of it. I find I respond first to the image, and then later to what they're talking about. There's the colors, the richness, and I think on both of these shows, because there's a very cinematic quality to both, a very high level of visual quality and sophistication, that it keeps me inspired as if I'm working on film.
Right.
And I've tried to keep that same point of view. I said, I don't want to change my point of view that I'm doing television here. I want to let's just keep the point of view that these are little films, and we're going to do everything that we do just like we would a film, and treat it that way. And visually, it looks that way. So let's just stay in that mindset.
Absolutely, yeah. And well, to wrap up, I always like to ask composers this one question. If you could score any movie ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer, pretending the original score never existed, which film would you choose?
Oh my goodness gracious me! Never been asked that.
Well, good. That's good on me then.
Yeah. Well, this is I'm trying to think why I thought of this, because I sort of took the flash answer right out of that I got, and I'm trying to think of why, if I can justify this choice. But for some reason, I thought The Matrix.
Oh, okay.
And I just think when I first saw the first Matrix movie, it sort of shook me. But I thought this is the movie that I've always thought should be being made. It's big, it's commercial, and yet it operates at many, many levels. It's science fiction, it's fantasy, but there's this sort of spiritual metaphor to the whole thing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And no disrespect to Don Davis, because I love what he did.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant score.
It is, but I just love that type of storytelling that has a huge imaginative idea that isn't just what you think it is. It's more, and therefore you could sit after the movie and discuss it for hours as to what do they really mean by this, and what are we supposed to come away thinking. And yet at the same time, my 16-year-old son can go and go through 3 bags of popcorn and scream and yell and have a good time.
Well, that's a great answer. I don't think anyone has said the Matrix yet. And people always kind of reach back to the classics, but that's awesome.
Well, that's a classic at this point.
Oh, it's true. I guess that was 1999, so it's been a while. But Mark, thank you so much for your time. It was such a great honor and pleasure to chat with you today and get your perspective and point of view. So thank you again so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.